A claw does not ask your rank before it finds you. It does not check whether you are a warrior with iron in your blood, or a healer with worn boots and an empty title. It does not pause to read the invisible mark the pack stamps on every person it has decided does not matter. On the night of the blood moon gathering inside Iron Vale's great hall, those claws were aimed at two small or irreplaceable lives, two children who did not yet understand why the world around them had learned to be afraid of their father's name. The plan was simple: break the Alpha King without touching the Alpha King, destroy the only two things he loved, and watch the most feared wolf in the Northern Territories come apart from the inside. Instead, the claws found Stefania Finch, a woman with no wolf, no rank, no title the pack would put in its ledgers, no reason, by any law Iron Vale recognized, to step into the path of a rogue strike for children who barely knew her name. And yet she moved. In one quiet, unremarkable second, the kind that does not announce itself before it rewrites everything, she chose. This is the story of what that choice cost her, what it cracked open, what it set in motion. And this is the story of the moon goddess who had been arranging something long before either of them was paying attention. The night did not begin with claws. It began with frost on old stone, a worn grey cloak pulled tight against mountain wind, and a woman who had spent 5 years practicing the art of being somewhere without being seen, about to walk into the one night that would make that impossible. The Iron Vale Mountains had a specific cold in late autumn, not the sharp, warning kind that made you pull your coat tighter in one quick motion. This was deeper, settled. They're the kind that moved into old stone walls and stayed there until spring decided to come back, and even then it left something behind, a faint chill in the corners of rooms, a memory of winter that the stone refused to let go. Stefania Finch crossed the lower courtyard with her healer's satchel over one shoulder, and her breath making small white clouds ahead of her. She was not thinking about destiny, or she was not thinking about fate or the moon goddess, or the ancient bond the old wolves spoke of in reverent, careful voices. She was thinking about whether Harris Doolin, the head healer, no relation to her father, an irony she had long stopped finding funny, would give her the look for being 3 minutes late to the rotation. She knew the look well. She had been collecting it for 5 years. It was the look of a man who found her useful and wished she were easier to dismiss. It was the look of someone who had decided, long before she walked through his door, that she was temporary, and kept being surprised when she showed up the next morning, steady and quiet, ready to work. She adjusted her satchel strap and moved through the side entrance of the great hall. The hall was already filling. Stefania had been in this room dozens of times, on healing rotation, on supply delivery, but once on the impossible errand of tracking down an elder who had wandered off during a fever and ended up asleep in the ceremonial antechamber. She knew the layout, the iron torch brackets running along both walls, throwing warm amber light across the dark stone. The blood moon altar at the hall's center, where Elder Gregory Hobbs was arranging sacred candles with the focused concentration of a man who controlled ceremony, because ceremony was the only thing he could control. The long tables draped in deep green cloth, the banners hanging overhead, Iron Vale green and black, the iron claw at their center, old enough that the edges had gone soft. The hall smelled of pine resin and candle wax, and the particular electricity that gathered when wolves filled a space that meant something. Stefania moved to the eastern wall, found Pearl Haskins already posted there with her supply kit open, and received a bright, slightly frantic smile in return. For Pearl was the kind of person who took up space with warmth. She had red hair and quick eyes, and the ability to hold 4 conversations at once without losing the thread of any of them. She had been Stefania's closest friend for 3 years, which mostly looked like Pearl talking and Stefania listening, and both of them understanding, without needing to say so, that this was how they worked best. "You're almost late," Pearl said. "I'm on time," Stefania said. "To Harris's time or actual time?" Stefania did not answer, which was its own kind of answer. She checked her satchel inventory: binding cloth, numbing salve, fever compress, 3 glass vials of concentrated clotting agent, and found her post along the eastern wall, where she could see the full length of the room without being seen herself. That was the skill she had refined most carefully in 5 years. Presence without visibility. She moved through Ironvale like weather, noticed when needed, was unacknowledged when not, leaving no particular impression behind when she was gone. The hall filled, pack wolves in their evening clothes, high-rank families claiming the central tables, warriors in formation along the exits. The blood moon. Gathering was the one sacred night each year when the Alpha King opened the great hall to the full pack, a tradition older than the current bloodline, rooted in the belief that the moon goddess needed to see her wolves together, unified, grateful. Whatever the spiritual origins, the practical effect was a room full of everyone who had power in Ironvale, standing close enough together to be watched, which was either good politics or very dangerous, depending on which side of the room you were standing on. Stefania was standing on the wall side, the invisible side, the side that kept her satchel stocked and her head down. The doors opened. True power did not need announcement. The 6-pack warriors moved through the main entrance in a tight formation, scanning exits, reading faces, checking hands with the trained efficiency of wolves who had never once been allowed to fully relax. The room's noise dropped by half before anyone consciously registered why. Then it dropped further. At the formation's center, Alpha King Lutano Brock. He was taller than he looked in the pack portraits, broader. He had the kind of presence that did not push against a room so much as simply settle into it, the way a stone settles into water, without announcement, with complete authority. A face shaped not by comfort, but by hard choices made honestly. Eyes the deep amber of a wolf, fully at home in his own dominance. He wore no ceremonial robe, only a fitted dark tunic with the Ironvale crest at the collar, and the absence of ceremony said more than any robe would have. Stefania had seen the Alpha King a dozen times across a dozen pack gatherings. She had developed a careful, practiced habit of not looking directly at him, the way you did not look directly at a fire when you were standing close enough to feel the heat. It was simpler, safer. He was the Alpha King. She was the healer's assistant with the packless father and the room that covered her rent, and not much else. There was no scenario in which looking became useful. She looked now. Not at him, but at what he was holding, clinging to his left hand with the full-bodied grip of a small child who had decided this was where he would be for the evening, was a boy. 5 years old, a miniature version of his father's tunic. Wide, completely unafraid dark eyes, taking in the great hall as though it were a very interesting puzzle he had been given time to solve. Ren, the Alpha King's son. In Lutano's right arm, for cradled against his shoulder, with the easy comfort of a child who had spent her whole life being held exactly like this, was Isla, Ren's twin. She was already half asleep, her small fingers wrapped in the fabric of her father's collar, her cheek pressed against his chest. Something in Stefania's chest went very still. She had heard about the twins, of course. The whole pack had. Born 5 years ago, in the same storm that took their mother, the Alpha's first mate, whose name was still spoken quietly in the pack, the way you spoke the name of someone the grief was still attached to. Lutano had raised them alone, or as alone as an Alpha King could be, with an entire household at his disposal. But anyone who watched him carefully enough, and Stefania, from her wall post, had watched many things, could see that the household help was supplementary. The core of it was him. Wren and Isla were the most guarded thing in Iron Vale, but not because of the warriors stationed around them, but because of the particular way their father's body positioned itself between them and any door. She watched Lutano settle the twins at the table beside his seat. She watched him check the room once, a single complete sweep that the untrained eye would miss, but she caught it, the practiced assessment of a man who was always, on some level, counting the exits and calculating the threats. Then he sat. Miss and Isla climbed immediately into his lap, and he let her without missing a beat of the conversation someone was already pulling him into. Stefania looked away. She checked her satchel. She moved toward the water table. The evening progressed the way these evenings did. The ceremony, the candle lighting, the elder's address. Elder Gregory Hobbs at the altar, his voice carrying through the hall with the weight of someone who had been performing these words for decades. Or the gathered wolves attentive for a moment, before the social energy of the room began reasserting itself through every polite conversation happening underneath the ceremony. Stefania moved through her rotation. A young warrior with a twisted ankle at the gate. She wrapped it, sent him to sit, moved on. Pearl's kit needed restocking at the midpoint of the evening. The ceremonial cups along the eastern table needed water from the hall's kitchen alcove, while she was carrying the water jug back along the table when the wooden wolf fell. It hit the stone floor beside her boot, small, carved, painted with fading dark pigment. She looked down. Then she looked up. Wren was standing at the edge of his chair, leaning as far as small arms would allow, looking at the figurine on the floor with a face of very serious concern. She did not think about it. She set the jug down and picked it up. There was a smear of candle wax on the wolf's ear. She wiped it off on the corner of her apron. She held it out to Wren. He looked at it. He looked at her. His brow was furrowed in the way of a child who had a thought that required full facial involvement. "He fell," Wren said. "He does that sometimes," Stefania said. "But he always lands right side up. See?" She turned the wolf upright in her palm. Wren considered this information with the gravity it deserved. Then he took the figurine back, checked it himself, and looked at his father. Lutano was looking at Stefania. She felt it before she registered it, the specific weight of attention from someone whose attention was not casual. She stepped back immediately. She picked up the water jug. She found her spot along the eastern wall and didn't look at the Alpha's table again. She didn't see the service door open. She almost missed it. She was backing away toward her post, her eyes on the stone floor, or when the reflection caught her. The ceremonial mirror above the blood moon altar, old silver-backed glass, throwing back a wide angle of the hall behind her. The service door near the hall's eastern corner, a wolf stepping through. She did not recognize him. The uniform was Iron Vale colors. The face was blank, collected, the expression of a pack member at a sacred gathering. But the posture was wrong, too tightly controlled, or too still in a room full of wolves who had been eating and drinking and talking for 2 hours. Pack wolves at a gathering carried themselves loosely, relaxed in the particular way of people who belonged somewhere. This wolf did not carry himself like someone who belonged, and his eyes were not on the Alpha King. They were moving toward the gap between the children's chairs. The realization came not as a thought, but as a physical certainty. Cold, complete, of arriving in the time it took to draw a breath. Not Lutano. The children. She did not calculate distance. She did not weigh her options. She did not ask herself the 17 reasonable questions that should have preceded the next moment. She crossed the space between herself and the twins in the time it took the rogue to raise his arm, moving faster than she had ever moved in her life, throwing herself into the gap between his descending claws and the 2 small bodies in the chairs. The strike connected. The claws tore across her right shoulder and dragged down her side, a line of fire that went from sharp to vast in the space of a breath. She was already going down, and as she went, she pulled both pups beneath her, wrapping her arms around them, pressing her weight over them, her own body the only thing between them and whatever came next. She hit the stone floor. The hall erupted. She could hear it in pieces. Warriors' voices, the screech of chairs, Wren crying against her shoulder with small, terrified sobs, Isla frozen and silent in her arms, with her face pressed into Stefania's neck. She could hear someone shouting commands. She could hear the rogue being intercepted. She could feel the blood, warm and fast, soaking into her healer's apron. Then she could hear something else. A voice she had only ever heard at an even, controlled register, carrying across the hall as though the air itself stepped out of the way for it, or not controlled now, raw, breaking open at the edges in a way the pack had never heard from it. Wren, Isla. 2 names. Nothing else. Everything else. He reached her in seconds. She knew it was him before she looked. By the way the space around her changed, the way the air shifted when he came down to his knees on the stone beside her, the warmth of hands far steadier than they had any right to be pressing against her shoulder. She tried to speak. The room was tilting. "What the children?" she managed. "I have them." His voice was close. Very close. Still not fully even. "I have them. They are safe." Wren was still crying. She could feel Isla's hands, tiny fingers still gripping the fabric of her sleeve, not letting go. She felt herself being lifted. She looked up once, at the great hall's ceiling, at the blood moon banners, at the amber torchlight, and at the face above her, looking down with an expression she had never seen on it before. Not the Alpha King's face. Something underneath that. Something that did not have a title. "Are they safe?" she thought, and then the ceiling went white, and then it went away. 5 years before the night of the blood moon gathering, in early autumn, when the leaves on the Iron Vale foothills were just beginning to turn, a man named Doolin Finch came home to his daughter with sawdust on his hands, and a look on his face she had never seen before. He was not a large man, not a warrior. He was a craftsman, the kind the pack needed and never thought to honor, the kind who built the long tables in the common hall, and the shelves in the healer's storage room, and the benches in the children's learning house. His joints were clean and true. His work lasted. He took quiet, honest pride in that, in the particular satisfaction of making something that held. He sat down at their small kitchen table and folded his hands on the wood he had made himself. He told her calmly, and the way he told her everything, without drama, in the direct voice of a man who believed the truth was always easier than the version you dressed up, that Elder Armani Richmond had summoned him to the council chamber that afternoon. There was a discrepancy in the pack treasury records, materials missing from the construction accounts. Someone had been diverting funds slowly, carefully, for months. The evidence, Elder Richmond explained, pointed toward the craftsman's quartermaster office, toward Doolin. Her father had looked at that evidence for a long time. He had asked questions that no one answered. He had listed 3 witnesses who could confirm his whereabouts on the dates in question. The elder had thanked him for his time and told him the council would be in contact. 3 days later, 2 pack warriors came to the door. No formal hearing, no proper challenge, no chance for the witnesses to speak. The decision had been made at the council level. The accusation was sufficient. The evidence was presented. The ruling stood. Doolin Finch, craftsman, was stripped of his pack standing and his right to remain within Iron Vale's borders. He was given until sunrise to leave. He was driven into rogue territory. He did not return. Stefania had been 19. She had stood at the edge of the eastern border and watched the forest take her father in the grey dawn light, and she had made herself watch until she could not see him anymore. She had not cried until she was back inside the pack borders. She had not told anyone why. She had applied to the Healer's Hall the following week. Harris Doolin, no relation, the universe's small continuing joke, had accepted her application with the reluctant efficiency of someone who needed the help and resented needing it. He had made it clear in his first week of working with her that she was provisional, or that her position was conditional, that the pack had done her a courtesy by accepting a woman without standing into a professional hall, and she should remember that. She had remembered it. She had also shown up every single morning for 5 years, on time or 3 minutes early, regardless of what Harris implied about her status. She had restocked every kit, and she had wrapped every sprained ankle and cleaned every fever wound and sat through every night rotation and learned every herb in the hall's stock until she could identify them by smell alone. She had done it because leaving would mean letting the pack have the last word. She was not ready to give them that. Her world in Iron Vale was small and deliberately constructed. Pearl Haskins, who had appointed herself Stefania's friend with the cheerful certainty of someone who did not believe in waiting to be invited. Pearl brought food when Stefania forgot to eat, which was often, and argued with Harris twice on her behalf, which Stefania never asked for, and quietly, genuinely appreciated. There was Baylor Conway, senior pack warrior, broad and unhurried, what with hands the size of small plates, and a manner that suggested he had decided long ago that unnecessary movement was wasteful. He gave Stefania the same nod every time they passed in the corridor. Not a greeting, exactly. An acknowledgement. The look of someone who saw her, and had decided this was worth indicating. She had never asked him why. He had never explained. There was the room in the pack's lower residential wing, with its one window and its second-hand bed frame, and its rent that she covered, and nothing else. There was her healer's satchel, worn soft at the strap from 5 years of carrying. There was the small carved shelf above the window, where she kept 3 things: a dried herb bundle from Pearl, a smooth riverstone her father had given her when she was 12, and a copy of the pack's original craftsman records where his name appeared in clean, or honest ink. She had spent 5 years being invisible in a pack that had taken everything from her. She had spent 5 years tending the wounds of wolves who did not know her name, and thinking, on the long, quiet nights of the fever rotation, alone in the Healer's Hall with the candles burning low, that the moon goddess must have something specific in mind to keep arranging it so that she stayed. She had never expected to find out what that was. She had never, or in 5 years of careful invisibility, expected a rogue's claws and a pair of 5-year-old twins to be the answer. The ceiling was wrong. That was the first thing Stefania registered when she came back to herself. The ceiling was too high, too dark, with timber beams she did not recognize, running in a pattern she had never looked up at from a bed before. A fire burned to her left, amber and steady, but the room smelled of leather and pine resin, and something warmer underneath that she could not immediately name, but that felt, strangely, like a word she almost knew. The sheets were finer than anything she had ever slept in. The pillow under her head was deep and cool. The pain in her shoulder and side was a settled, deep throb that she recognized as the particular quality of a wound that had been properly closed. She was not in the Healer's Hall. "You're awake." The voice came from her right. A woman, small-framed, sitting by the fire with a ledger open on her knee and a pen in her hand, regarding Stefania with the composed attention of someone who had been waiting for this specific event. Pack Doctor Lydia Mills. Stefania knew her by reputation. Precise, thorough, the kind of medical professional who did not soften information unnecessarily, because she found that people generally handled truth better than they handled surprises. "Where am I?" Stefania asked. Her own voice came out rough, lower than usual. "The Alpha's private wing," Lydia said, as though this required no further commentary. "How long?" 3 days. She closed the ledger. 2 lacerations. The shoulder was clean. It will heal fully with rest. The side was considerably worse. You lost a significant amount of blood on the hall floor before we could get you stable. A pause. You were also running a fever for the first 2 days, which was unpleasant for everyone present. Another pause, slightly longer. You kept asking about the children in your sleep. Stefania lay still for a moment, processing. 3 days. She had lost 3 days. The blood moon gathering, the rogue, Wren's small body under her arms, Isla's fingers in her collar, the claws. "The pups," she said. "Are they unharmed?" Lydia said. "Completely, thanks to you." The breath that moved through her was long and unsteady. She pressed it flat, or she made herself look at the ceiling and breathe normally. "Rest," Lydia said. "The Alpha wishes to speak with you when you're ready." I told him that was a flexible definition. Stefania looked at the fire. She thought about what it meant that she was in the Alpha's private wing. She thought about Lutano Brock's face on the hall floor, not the Alpha King's face, the one underneath it. She filed that thought carefully in a place she was not going to examine right now. She fell back asleep before she could decide what ready meant. When she woke the second time, the fire had been rebuilt, and the chair by the door held a different occupant. Lutano Brock sat with his elbows on his knees and his hands folded, watching her with the particular quality of attention she had noticed from across a crowded room. Complete, unhurried, without the filter of rank assessment. He had clearly not slept. Not from inability, she read in him, but from refusal. Or he wore the same dark tunic, now without the crestpin. There were shadows under his eyes that did not belong to the face of a man who had been taking adequate care of himself. Lydia was not in the room. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Lutano said, "How is the pain?" "Manageable," she said. It was mostly true. He nodded. He looked at her for another beat. Then he leaned back in the chair, and his voice shifted. Not cruelly, but with the particular precision of a man who had been working his way to a question for 3 days. "Who sent you?" She heard him. The words arrived, and she understood their shape and their implication, and for a moment she simply looked at him and let herself understand the full scope of what was being said. "Who sent you? Not thank you. Not you saved my children. Not I owe you more than I know how to say. Who sent you?" She had taken 2 claw wounds. She had nearly died on his hall floor, or her shoulder was bandaged and her side was held together with Lydia's careful stitching, and she was lying in a bed that was finer than anything she had ever slept in, because she had put her body between his children and a rogue strike. And he was interrogating her. The fever medication was still in her blood. She could feel it making things slightly slow, slightly distant. But the burn in her chest that ignited at his question was sharper than anything the medication could reach. "Do you think I planned this?" she said. "I think nothing convenient is accidental." His voice was even. That was what made it frightening. Not anger, just the steady patience of a man who had watched people lie to him from close range for 11 years. A packless woman with no combat training reacts faster than my head warrior. She places herself precisely between a trained rogue and my children. She survives. "I saw a wolf moving wrong," Stefania said. Her voice was very controlled. "Oh, I saw where his eyes were going. I moved. From the eastern wall to the children's table in the time it took a trained rogue to complete his strike. I was already close. I had just handed your son his figurine back." A beat. He looked at her. "If that is too difficult to believe," she said. "If plain instinct is too simple an answer for you, then I think you have spent so long surrounded by people with reasons that you have forgotten what someone without one looks like." The silence that followed was not the silence of a man collecting his next argument. It was something quieter. He was looking at her face the way she had seen him look at pack ledgers, not for the information on the surface, but for the thing underneath the information, looking for the flicker, the small delay, or the fraction of a moment where story and truth parted company. He found nothing. She watched him find nothing, and she watched something else happen in the quiet of that. Something she didn't have a name for, something that moved behind his eyes like weather arriving. His hands, still folded, pressed together slightly. A small, controlled motion, the motion of a man containing something he was not prepared for. She did not know what it was. She was too tired and too injured and too angry to think clearly enough to identify it. "Rest," he said finally, his voice quieter. "We will speak more when you are stronger." He stood. He moved to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame and did not turn around. "My children are safe," he said. "Because of you." Another pause. "I will not forget that." He left. The door closed. Stefania lay in the fine bed in the Alpha's private wing and stared at the ceiling for a long time. She had spent 5 years being invisible in this pack. She had spent 5 years being careful and quiet and present without drawing attention, and in one night she had made herself impossible to ignore. By the Alpha King himself, in his own private wing, in a bed she had no framework for occupying. She pressed the back of her hand over her eyes. She thought about the way his hands had moved when she answered him. That small, involuntary press of his fingers. The weather behind his eyes. For she filed it. She put it in the place she was not going to examine. She went to sleep. On the second morning in the Alpha's chambers, it was not Lutano who appeared in the doorway. It was Baylor Conway. He moved with the careful delicacy of a large man who had learned, through some combination of experience and genuine attention, that gentle existed and was worth practicing. He was carrying a tray, bread, broth, a pot of strong tea, and tucking it under one arm was a plain folder, or the kind the pack used for official records. He set the tray on the bedside table. He placed the folder beside it. He looked at Stefania with the same steady nod she had collected from him in the corridors for 5 years, the nod that said, without further elaboration, that he saw her. "Boss says eat," he said. "The folder is from him, too? Read it when you're ready." He turned toward the door. Then he stopped, his back still to her. "I was 20 feet away when it happened." He said it to the door, not to her. "I've been running it in my head since. I was 20 feet away and I didn't move in time." A pause. "You did." He left before she could find words for a response. She ate first. Not because she was hungry, but because Lydia had been specific about the importance of eating, and Stefania had spent enough time in healing work to know that patients who ignored their own instructions were the most frustrating kind. She ate half the bread and all the broth, and drank the tea while it was still hot. Then she opened the folder. It was thorough. She could see that in the first page, her birth record, her healer's certification, her work history, her bank record showing the balance that covered her rent, and not much else. All of it assembled with the efficiency of someone who had known exactly where to look. She turned pages. Her father's work history, his pack service record, stretching back 20 years, clean and unbroken, the Treasury discrepancy report, the original accusation, the Elder Council's ruling, all of it laid out in the flat, official language that made terrible things sound procedural. And then the last section. A secondary investigation, conducted by Baylor Conway, evidently, over the past 3 days, while she was unconscious. going back to the original treasury discrepancy and doing what no one had done at the time, looking at the dates. The treasury materials had been diverted for 3 months before her father ever had access to those accounts. The diversion ran through a transport arrangement with a supplier whose family ties she now traced with her finger, following the paper trail until she reached a name she recognized: Elder Armani Richmond. Her father had not taken anything. He had never taken anything. He had been given to the rogue territory as a solution to a problem, as a quiet man who had noticed something he was not supposed to notice, a craftsman doing an inventory check who had stumbled across a discrepancy he would eventually have brought to the Alpha's attention. He had been removed before he could. Stefania set the folder down on the blanket. She put both hands flat on it. Her hands were shaking, not from grief, or not from the particular aching wound that had been with her for 5 years, the one that lived in the space where her father's voice used to be. This was different, cleaner, harder. The shaking of something held in compression for a long time, finally reaching the pressure point where it had no choice but to move. The door opened. Lutano stepped in. She looked up at him. She looked at him the way she had not allowed herself to look at anyone in this pack for 5 years. Fully, but without the careful management of what her face showed. "Your counsel destroyed an innocent man," she said. Her voice was steady. She was surprised to find that it was steady. They arranged false evidence, drove him out of his home, and sent him into rogue territory to die. And I have spent 5 years tending the wounds of the pack that killed him. He did not look away. "I know," he said. "You know now," she said. "You had a craftsman's daughter living in your pack for 5 years, working in your healer's hall, taking her wage and keeping her head down. Did you know then?" The silence was its own answer. "I want the name of who signed that ruling," she said. "Armani Richmond arranged the accusation," Lutano said. "I did not know. That is not an excuse. It is a fact I am telling you, because you deserve the truth without softening. I signed off on a counsel I trusted, and that trust was used to destroy someone who did not deserve it." His voice was low and direct. "I am going to fix it. Your father's name will be restored in the pack record. Publicly, in the Great Hall. I will give you my word on that now if you want it." She looked at him for a long moment. "I don't want your word," she said. "I want it done." He held her gaze. Something in him, she could see it, the particular quality of a man reassessing something, shifted. "Done," he said. The door burst open. Wren came through it first, what with the absolute confidence of a small person who had decided that whatever warrior was posted outside didn't apply to him. He was carrying his carved wooden wolf. He walked to the side of the bed with complete seriousness, climbed up onto the chair beside the nightstand, and placed the wolf carefully on the blanket next to her hand. "He helped me when I fell off the training wall," Wren said gravely. "He can help you too. He's good at hurts." Stefania looked at the small carved figure on the blanket, the same one she had wiped the wax off, the one she had told him always landed right side up. Isla appeared on the other side of the bed, quieter, with her hands in her pocket. She produced a small bundle of dried herbs tied with kitchen string. She placed it on the blanket with precision. "I made it," Isla said softly. "Pearl showed me which ones help healing. The lavender and dried mint and a little bit of the yellow one." She looked at Stefania with wide, serious eyes. "Does it hurt a lot?" Stefania looked at these 2 small wolves who had absolutely no reason to be kind to her, except that kindness had been built into them, carefully and over years, by someone who had clearly been doing something right in the quiet hours that no one outside this household ever got to see. "It's getting better," she said. And then, because Isla's face was waiting for more, The herbs will help. Thank you for making them. Isla nodded, satisfied. She climbed up beside her brother on the chair, and the two of them sat together, looking at Stefania with the open assessment of children who had not yet learned to pretend they were not evaluating something. Lutano was standing in the doorway. She did not have to look to know it. She felt the change in the room's air, the way you felt a candle being lit in the dark, the particular warmth of something that was already present, suddenly visible. She glanced at him. He was watching his children the way he had watched them in the great hall before everything broke apart, with the open, unguarded softness that existed only in the space between his jaw and the crown of his daughter's sleeping head. The most unguarded thing in Iron Vale, but he was watching her too, watching the way she looked at Ren and Isla with something that was not performed warmth or calculated kindness, watching the way her hands moved, carefully, to touch the herb bundle with genuine appreciation, watching her look at his children the way someone looked at something they would take a rogue's claws for again, without a second's hesitation. She felt the warmth of his attention, and made herself look back at the children. You can come back tomorrow, she told them. Ren picked up his wolf to examine it. Tomorrow and after tomorrow? Tomorrow and after tomorrow, she said. Ren looked at his father with an expression of pure, comprehensive satisfaction. Lutano's face did something small and quick that she would have missed if she hadn't been watching for it. The ghost of something unguarded, arriving and retreating before it could fully form. He stepped back from the doorway. Come on, he said to the twins. She needs rest. Ren slid off the chair. Isla paused, looked at the herb bundle, looked at Stefania. The yellow one is the most important, Isla said, very seriously. Pearl said so. Then she followed her brother. The door closed. The room was quiet. The fire burned. Outside, the autumn wind moved against the high stone walls. Stefania lay back against the pillow and looked at the carved wolf and the herb bundle, side by side on the blanket. She thought about her father's hands, the evenness of his joints, of the quiet pride of work that held. She thought about the pack record that would be corrected in the great hall, publicly, in the place his name had been taken from. She thought about a man standing in a doorway, watching his children choose her, and not looking away. On the 5th day, Lutano gave Stefania work. She had been expecting the conversation to be about what came next, where she would go now, what her position in the pack would look like, or whether the hospitality of the Alpha's wing came with conditions. She had rehearsed several versions of telling him that she did not need his charity and could return to the Healer's Hall under her own terms. What she had not rehearsed was him setting a stack of bound supply ledgers on the bedside table and saying simply, "The records room, when you are well enough to sit upright for more than an hour. My administrators have been comfortable for too long. Comfortable people stop seeing, not find the fat." She had looked at the ledgers. She had looked at him. She had decided the conversation she had rehearsed was less interesting than this one. She was in the records room by the afternoon of the 6th day. It was a long, narrow room off the main administrative corridor, high shelves, a single window letting in flat autumn light, a work table scarred from decades of pens and ledger edges. It had smelled of old paper and the particular dry dust of numbers that had been sitting undisturbed for too long. Stefania spread the first set of accounts across the table and got to work. She was good at this, not because she had been trained in it. She hadn't, formally. But 5 years of Healer's Hall administration had built in her a particular sensitivity to where numbers went wrong. Small discrepancies, amounts that almost matched but didn't. So invoices for materials that showed up in accounting, but not in inventory. The particular fingerprint of careful, patient theft. She found it on the 4th evening. It was late. The rest of the administrative corridor was empty. The candle had burned halfway down. She had been working through the northern border outpost supply contracts, Ironvale Timber, Grey Day, or invoiced and paid, and something in the delivery receipts had been bothering her since mid-afternoon without her being able to identify exactly why. She found it in the material quality recording. Grade A timber invoiced, Grade C delivered. The difference in value, several hundred units across 6 shipment records, disappearing into a transport arrangement with a supplier she had not looked closely at yet. She followed the supplier's registration. She traced the family ties. She was still sitting with her pen in her hand, the records spread in front of her, when the door opened. Lutano came in. He had apparently come to tell her to stop working and sleep, which she could read in his initial expression before his eyes moved to the records and he registered that something had been found. He crossed the room. He leaned over her shoulder to look at the page she had marked. He was close, closer than the territory between them had been before. She was aware of it in the particular way she had been carefully not being aware of things for days now. The warmth of his presence, the way his attention landed on the numbers with the same complete focus it landed on everything he looked at. She kept her eyes on the records. "The transport supplier," he said. "Connected to Richmond," she finished. "Same family name as the import arrangement in my father's accusation records." She kept her voice flat. "It is a pattern, or Armani Richmond has been running material diversion through a family supplier network for at least 6 years." He was quiet for a moment, reading. Then, "You found this in 4 days." "I hate theft," she said simply. "Rich or poor." He was quiet again. A different quiet this time. Not the silence of assessment, but the silence of a man sitting with something he had just understood. "Then you are in the wrong household," he said. Not cruelly. Almost with something that, as if she'd had more practice interpreting his tone, she might have called wry. "You are at least honest about what you are," she said. He set down the record he had picked up. He straightened. Then, without announcing it, without making anything of it, he produced from the small carry space at his side a cup of tea. He set it on the table beside her hand. Just that. She looked at it. She looked at him. "You brought tea," she said. "You have been in here for 6 hours." She picked up the cup. He was still leaning over the records, making a note on the edge of her marked page. Their hands were close together on the table, not touching, but occupying the same small territory of the work table's surface. Neither of them moved away. She felt the warmth of the cup and the warmth of the room, and the particular warmth of sitting in a small, candle-lit space with someone whose presence she had been careful about for days. She felt the pull of it. The quiet, the specific pull of something that was not accidental, and was not something she could explain away with practical reasoning. Something she had been filing in the place she was not going to examine, and was becoming aware could not stay filed much longer. She made herself look at the records. "I will need to see the last 3 years of the midwinter ceremony contracts as well," she said. "If the pattern holds, there will be a larger diversion routed through the official gathering accounts. I'll have Baylor pull them." A knock at the doorframe. Elder Armani Richmond stood there. He was in formal elder's grey, unhurried, carrying himself with the smooth ease of a man who had learned that arriving without being expected told you things that planned meetings never could. He had a handsome face for his age, strong bones, silver hair, and the kind of face that had spent decades arranging itself into whatever expression the room required. He smiled at them both, his eyes moving between Lutano and Stefania, with the friendly, curious intelligence of someone reading a scene he had not been part of. "Working late," he said pleasantly. "Good." He looked at Stefania, and she felt it then, the thing she had noticed once before, and filed carefully. The flash of something cold underneath the warmth. There and gone in a fraction of a second, a lizard's blink. I came to suggest something to you both, Armani continued, addressing Lutano now. The midwinter gathering. Our allied pack representatives will all be present. The woman who saved the Alpha King's pups, brought to the gathering on the Alpha's arm. He spread his hands in a gesture of obvious good sense. A display of strength. It says the pack is not rattled. It says you are not afraid of what was attempted. Lutano looked at Stefania. A question without words. She looked at Armani. He was watching her with the warm, attentive face of a man with excellent manners. But she felt it again. The cold behind the warmth. The gap between the face and what the face was covering. She had spent 5 years watching powerful wolves in this pack and learning to read what they didn't say. She had learned that the things people didn't say were usually the most important things in the room. What Armani Richmond was not saying was standing behind him like a shadow, and she did not yet know its shape, but she knew it was there. "I'll go," she said. Lutano held her gaze for a moment. Then he looked at Armani. "We'll confirm the arrangements." Armani smiled. The full, warm smile of a man who had just gotten exactly what he needed from a room. Wonderful. He excused himself. His footsteps receded down the corridor, smooth and even, the footsteps of a man who had never needed to hurry because he had always arranged for things to arrive at his speed. Stefania pressed her fingers flat on the records table. She had agreed to go because refusing felt like hiding, and she was done with hiding. But as the sound of Armani's footsteps faded, as she sat with the quiet certainty of someone who had been reading between the lines for a long time. He had not suggested this because it benefited Lutano. He had suggested it because it benefited something else. She just didn't know yet what was waiting for her at the other end of it. The midwinter gathering of Iron Vale was the one night each year when every allied pack in the Northern Territories sent formal representation to the Great Hall. It was the pack's most visible political event, a night when Iron Vale's strength, stability, and alliances were communicated not through declarations, but through the evidence of the room itself. Who was present? Who was standing beside whom? Where the Alpha King's attention rested. Stefania stood in the guest chamber doorway in a deep forest green gown and looked at herself in the standing mirror. It was borrowed from Lydia, who was roughly her height, and who had produced it from a wardrobe with the efficiency of someone who had been expecting to be asked. The fabric was simple and well made, the kind that did not announce itself, but did not apologize either. Stefania's hair was pinned back, the bandage on her shoulder was covered. She looked in the mirror like someone who had decided to be visible and was learning what that felt like. She had been visible to one person for going on 3 weeks now, and she was still adjusting. The door opened behind her. Lutano stepped in. He was in formal Iron Vale black, no crest pin, the tunic cut close and precise. He looked at her in the mirror with the complete, unhurried attention she had come to recognize as simply how he looked at things he was paying attention to. He crossed the room. He reached into his pocket and produced a small silver pendant, a fine chain, at the end of it, a delicate claw shape in dark silver. He stepped behind her. His hands came to her collar. "It has a locator stone," he said, his voice low and close, his fingers working the clasp at the back of her neck with care. "If we are separated, press the claw. Baylor will find you within 3 minutes, regardless of where you are in the hall." His hand stilled at her collar. He looked at her reflection in the mirror, at the line of her neck, the set of her shoulders, the careful steadiness of her face. "Stay beside me tonight," he said. It was not a command. It was something less guarded than that. She met his reflection's gaze. "I will." He stepped back. She felt the absence of his presence as a specific thing, the way you felt the cold when a door closed. The great hall was magnificent in the way only old things could be magnificent, not with newness, but with weight. The midwinter candles ran the length of both walls in tiers. The Allied Pack's banners hung alongside Iron Vale's Iron Claw green. Every table was full, at every level of the hall occupied, every wolf in the room conducting at least 3 conversations while conducting at least 1 private assessment of everyone else. Stefania moved through it on Lutano's arm. She found, to her own surprise, that she was good at this. 5 years of invisibility had given her a very accurate reading of rooms. She knew which conversations people wanted to have and which they were avoiding. She knew when attention was genuine and when it was assessment dressed as friendliness. She knew how to give people the version of an answer that satisfied their curiosity without giving them anything they could use. She charmed Megan Lambert from the Westfeld Pack, who wanted to talk about the Blood Moon attack and the rogue's capture. She navigated a very pointed set of questions from an elder historian who seemed to be trying to establish exactly what her rank and relationship to the Alpha King were. She avoided stepping on the ceremonial rug twice, and managed to keep the smile on her face the one time a high-rank wolf from the Eastern delegation looked at her with the frank evaluation of someone trying to assess whether she was a threat. Through all of it, Lutano was beside her, not hovering, not performing anything, or simply present, in the way he was present in every room he occupied, with the gravity of something settled, his hand at her back when they moved through crowds, his attention anchoring to her face when the conversation required him to split his focus and he was making sure she was accounted for. Once, briefly, his fingers closed around hers when a particularly loud burst of wolves' voices went up from the central table, and she felt him check her reaction before he registered that she was steady, and his grip relaxed into something that stopped being a check and became something else. She did not look at him when that happened. She looked at the room. Armani Richmond circulated. She tracked him with the corner of her vision. His easy movement through the space, his hand on this elder's shoulder, his lean toward that pack representative, the smooth, unhurried energy of a man who was comfortable at the center of things. Once, across the width of the hall, he caught her eye. He smiled. She held his gaze for 3 seconds, long enough to let him know she was watching. Then she turned back to the conversation she was in. The trap closed quietly, the way the best traps do. Armani appeared at Lutano's side with an expression of controlled urgency, the expression of a man carrying news he would rather not carry but understood was necessary. A border communication from the eastern outpost. The regional pack chief, demanding a private meeting. "Urgent," he said. In the upper council room, the man claimed to have the name of the broker behind the Blood Moon rogue. Lutano's hand stilled at the small of Stefania's back. She felt him weigh it. She felt the conflict in him. The Alpha King who needed to follow a lead that could protect his children, and the man who did not want to step away from this particular person in this particular room. She looked up at him. "Go," she said quietly. "I'll stay with Baylor." He scanned the room until he located Baylor at the north wall. He held Baylor's gaze for a direct moment, the kind of communication that had no words, because it had no room for ambiguity. Baylor gave a single nod. Then Lutano looked back at Stefania, his expression holding something she was still learning the language of, and followed Armani through the crowd. She turned back to the gathering. A server crossed her path with a full tray, ceremonial drinks, the tall crystal glasses, the Iron Vale hall only used for midwinter. The tray hit something. Later she would understand it was hit deliberately, and went over in a comprehensive, spectacular crash that drew half the room's attention in a wave of startled laughter and the frantic activity of people stepping back from spreading liquid. In the 3 seconds of confusion, Stefania looked for Baylor. His post at the north wall was empty. A wolf she did not recognize was walking away from where Baylor had been standing, the two of them having apparently just concluded a brief, urgent conversation. She read the set of Baylor's shoulders from across the room, the particular tension of a man who had been given information he needed to act on immediately, who was being urgently needed somewhere he had not planned to be. She felt the locator pendant at her throat. I would not press that just yet. The hand that closed around her elbow was not Baylor's. It was not anyone she knew. A wolf she had not seen before tonight. Silver-haired, compact, with a scar through his left eyebrow and the flat eyes of someone who had agreed to do a specific job and was doing it with professional efficiency. And behind him, stepping into the space between her and the rest of the room, with the smooth, unhurried timing of a man who had arranged for exactly this amount of space to exist, was Armani Richmond. He was not going upstairs. There was no border communication. There was no Eastern Pack chief. The warmth had gone from his face entirely. What was left was the thing underneath. The cold calculation she had been reading the edges of for weeks. "You have been extraordinarily inconvenient," Armani said pleasantly. His voice was conversational, low enough to be private in the noise of the room. "You should have died on the hall floor. That would have been the clean resolution." He watched her absorb this with the clinical interest of someone observing an experiment. The plan was simpler then. Lutano broken by grief. The council recommends his younger cousin, Clay Turlow, who understands that the Alpha's role functions best with experienced guidance. The Northern Territories remain stable. Everyone adjusts. A pause. "Then you survived." She looked at him. She looked at the silver-haired wolf holding her arm. She looked at the angle of the Eastern Service passage behind Armani, the route through the hall's corridor to the building's side exit, where no one from the gathering would see or hear anything. "And you were a problem from the moment you woke up in his chambers," Armani continued. "And now you have been living in his household, working in his records, and I suspect you have already found what I have been very carefully building for 6 years." He straightened. "It ends tonight. You leave through that passage, and in the morning there is an unfortunate report about the Eastern Delegation's representatives. Lutano goes to war with the wrong enemy, and I help him manage the grief." He almost sounded regretful. "The moon goddess is unkind sometimes." Stefania was quiet. She was taking inventory. She had no wolf, no combat training, no weapon. She had a pair of good boots with a solid heel, a healer's training that included working knowledge of pressure points and joint vulnerabilities, and 5 years of moving through Iron Vale's buildings until she knew where everything was stored, including the ceremonial heating stones. They were on the altar display to her left, 3 arm lengths away. Smooth, flat stones used in the blood moon ritual, held at temperature all evening in their iron cradle for the ceremonial blessing. They had been heating for 4 hours. She knew their exact weight because she had handled them at the blood moon gathering 3 weeks ago. She looked at Armani. She drove the heel of her boot down on the silver-haired wolf's foot with everything she had. His grip broke by instinct. 1 second was no more. She needed one. She moved left. She grabbed the heating stone from the altar cradle with the cloth pad beside it. Her hands knew exactly where it was, and she connected with Armani's forearm at the pressure point behind the wrist that Lydia had shown her in a clinical context, and she had filed in the section of her memory labeled "sometimes useful." Armani recoiled. His control broke for the first time since she had known him. Pain cutting through the smooth politician's surface, his face going sharp and unguarded. She ran. Not toward the exit. Back into the hall. Back toward the crowd, toward the lights and the voices and the gathered wolves from every allied territory in the north. Every witness Armani had assembled for his own plan. Every pair of eyes he had arranged to be present tonight. She ran to the center of the gathering floor and she stopped. The room had already been turning, some heads at the sound of movement, to some at the sight of her. But when she stopped and drew breath, the silence that fell was the silence of a room that had been paying partial attention and was now paying complete attention. She found her voice. She made it carry. "Armani Richmond arranged the blood moon attack," she said. Not a scream, a statement. The kind that does not require noise, because truth at that volume does not need amplification. "He has just confessed it to me in the eastern corridor. He arranged the rogue. He arranged the target, the children, not the alpha. And 6 years ago, he arranged the false accusation that drove an innocent man named Doolin Finch from this pack and into rogue territory." The room was absolutely still. She could feel the weight of every pair of eyes in it. Allied pack representatives, council elders, warriors, the entire political structure of the northern territories, present and watching. Armani's design turned entirely against him. At the top of the grand staircase, where the door opened, Lieutenant Brock stood there. He had found an empty room, she would learn later. No pack chief, no border communication, a locked council door, and a note that Baylor Conway had left for him when he realized what had been done to separate them. He had come back down the stairs the way he came toward every hard thing, with the particular steadiness of a man who had already decided what he was doing before he stood up. His eyes found her first. She was standing in the center of his gathering hall with a torn hem and steady eyes, and her hand still holding the cloth from the altar cradle. And she was looking up at him, the way she had looked at him in the great hall 3 weeks ago on the stone floor, not asking to be saved, just making sure someone who mattered knew where she was. He came down the stairs, not running, walking, each step measured, the full authority of 11 years settling into every movement. Every allied wolf in the room reading the shape of it and going very still. His eyes moved from Stefania to Armani Richmond, who had followed her into the main hall with the silver-haired wolf beside him, both of them now standing in the particular exposure of people who have been made visible when they designed themselves for darkness. Lutano stopped in front of Armani. He did not shift. He did not raise his voice, or he did not reach for the display of dominance that was available to him and that every wolf in the room was anticipating. He asked one question, low and completely even. "Is there anything you would like to say before Baylor takes you to the council chamber?" Armani looked at him. The smooth political face had reassembled itself, not quite fully, the fracture lines still visible at the edges. He looked at the room. He looked at the gathered wolves from every allied territory. He looked at the evidence of everything that had just been said out loud, in front of witnesses, in a space he had chosen and arranged and filled. He closed his mouth. He looked at the floor. Baylor appeared from the hall's north side, having apparently freed himself from the fabricated distraction and returned in time for this specific moment. He moved to Armani with the calm, practiced efficiency of someone who had been waiting for a good reason to do exactly this. Lutano watched until the door at the hall's north end closed behind them. Then he turned and walked to Stefania. She stood her ground. She was still holding the altar cloth. Her hem was torn. There was a red mark on her forearm from the silver-haired wolf's grip, and she was going to have feelings about all of this later, in private, when she could afford to have them. But right now she was watching him cross the gathering floor toward her, with every allied representative in the northern territories looking on, and she was trying to understand what was in his face. He stopped in front of her. He looked at her for a long moment, at the torn hem and the steady eyes and the altar cloth she was still holding. Something moved through his face, quiet and enormous. He took the altar cloth gently from her hand and set it aside. He looked at her. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "Oh, no," she said. He nodded. Then he looked at the gathered hall, at every allied representative, every pack elder, every witness, and his voice carried without effort to every corner of the room. "You have all heard what has been said tonight. The council will convene tomorrow. Every record connected to Armani Richmond's council service will be examined. Any pack that has a connection to this matter will be contacted directly. A pause. Don't you also know what happened at the Blood Moon gathering 3 weeks ago? The woman standing here put her body between a rogue strike and my children. Tonight she put her voice between my pack and the man who arranged that attack. His eyes came back to her. Iron Vale does not forget its debts. The hall was very quiet. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, a wolf she did not recognize brought his fist to his chest in the old pack salute, the one reserved for someone who had served at cost. Then another. Then another. The sound of it moved through the room in a wave. Pack after pack, the gathered wolves of the Northern Territories, acknowledging a packless healer's assistant, who had taken on the most senior elder in Iron Vale with a heating stone and her own voice. Stefania stood at the center of it and let herself feel it, fully, without the protective layer of invisibility she had worn for 5 years. The weight of being seen completely by an entire room. The particular, as unfamiliar warmth of belonging to something that was claiming her back. The great hall of Iron Vale was quiet, in a way it had not been quiet in years. The midwinter gathering had ended with Armani Richmond in pack custody, and every allied representative carrying the full story home. Clay Turlo, Lutano's younger cousin, the man Armani had been arranging to place on the Alpha throne, had been brought in for questioning and had produced a confession before he was properly asked. He had not known about the Blood Moon attack in detail. He had known that Armani was managing things. He had told himself this was what politics looked like, and not examined it too closely. He had known, in the way that people knew things they did not want to know, that something was being done on his behalf that he had not authorized but was not refusing. He was not a monster. He was simply a man who had wanted something enough to look away from how it was being arranged. The council was empty, but the pack was processing. The first hard work of rebuilding, council seats, alliances, the painstaking review of 6 years of supply contracts and treasury records lay ahead in the steady daylight of weeks and months of honest labor. There was plenty of it. There would be more before it was done. Stefania sat in the records room in the morning light, not working, just sitting, which was something she hadn't let herself do without purpose in longer than she could account for. The flat, pale winter light came through the high window at an angle that made the dust in the air visible, small motes moving in slow arcs, unhurried, going nowhere in particular. She was thinking about her father's hands, the evenness of his joints, the quiet satisfaction of work that held, the way he had sat at their kitchen table with sawdust in the creases of his palms and told her the truth about what had happened, calmly, without drama, because he believed the truth was easier than the version you dressed up. He had been right about that. She had believed it herself for 5 years, and she was beginning to understand that she had gotten it from him, that it was the most useful thing he had given her, more useful than any specific skill, more useful than any piece of advice she could recall word for word. The bone-deep certainty that the truth said plainly, at full volume, was almost always more powerful than anything dressed up to look like it. She had proved that in the gathering hall last night. She thought she heard him, for a moment, not his voice exactly, but the quality of him, the steadiness of a man who had lived as honestly as the world around him allowed, and had not been diminished by what was done to him. She held that for a moment. She let it sit. Then the door opened. Lutano came in without announcement. He sat across from her without preamble. What which she had come to understand was simply how he operated, without the decorative packaging that some people use to fill the space around a difficult thing. He laid the secondary investigation results on the table between them. Baylor's complete report, the full chain of evidence, the paper trail that showed exactly how the false accusation against Doolin Finch had been constructed, whose hand had built it, and whose signature had given it authority. She looked at the papers. "The Council will make a formal acknowledgement," Lutano said. "The pack record will be corrected. This will be read in the Great Hall, where it was taken from him, with the full Council present, and every pack elder required to hear it." He paused. "Whatever else you want. Name it." She was quiet for a long moment. "I don't want anything else," she said finally. "I want his name said correctly, in the Great Hall, the way it should have been said 5 years ago. That is all I want." Lutano nodded. Done. The silence between them was different from the silences they had occupied earlier in this process. Not the silence of assessment, not the tension of two people deciding how much to trust each other. This was quieter, more settled. The silence of people who had passed through the difficult part of learning each other and were sitting on the other side. "I owe you more than an acknowledgement in the Great Hall," Lutano said. His voice was careful. Not managed, just careful, or the way you were careful with something you did not want to damage. "I know what this pack cost you. I know what I signed off on without looking closely enough. I will not argue that a correct record makes it even, because it doesn't." "No," she said. "It doesn't." A pause. "But it is the right thing, and you're doing it. That is different from nothing." He looked at her. The deep amber of his eyes in the morning light had something in it she was beginning to stop filing away and start letting herself read. She was saved from the moment expanding into something neither of them was quite prepared for by small feet in the corridor. The door opened, and Wren came through it first, because Wren always came through things first, followed by Isla, who was carrying a new drawing. Wren climbed up onto the chair beside the work table and opened one of the supply ledgers on the table, with the focused air of someone who had decided he would be doing the accounts today, and this required no discussion. Isla brought the drawing to Stefania. It was her, Stefania in the green gown, standing in the center of the gathering hall, surrounded by carefully drawn lines of gold that Isla had colored in with visible effort and complete conviction. Above her, Isla had drawn the midwinter candles. Below her, she had drawn the floor, and on the floor she had written, in the large, careful letters of a 5-year-old who had been practicing, "Brave." Stefania held the drawing for a moment. She felt the weight of it, not the paper, which was light, but what it represented. Being known by someone who had decided you were worth knowing before they were old enough to understand why. "Is she going to stay?" Isla asked. She was looking at her father. Lutano looked at Stefania. Stefania looked at the drawing. A long moment. "That is not my question to answer," Lutano said, his voice quiet and completely steady. "That is hers." Isla looked at Stefania. Wren looked up from the ledger he was apparently auditing. Stefania looked at the children, at the drawing, at the name her father should have kept. That would be restored in the Great Hall, in the honest record where it belonged. She looked at Lutano. "Tomorrow and after tomorrow," she said. It was the same thing she had said to Wren in the chamber. Wren's expression achieved a level of satisfaction she was not sure 5-year-old faces were designed to contain. He returned to the ledger. Isla climbed onto the chair beside her brother and folded her hands on the table in an exact imitation of her father. It was Pearl who came for the twins at midday, having apparently appointed herself the household's unofficial scheduling manager, with the cheerful certainty of someone who did not believe in asking permission. Pearl gave Stefania a look that contained approximately 14 different things, most of them warm, and then took both children by the hand and led them toward the noon meal. At the door, Pearl turned back. "For the record," she said, with a brightness that was doing a great deal of work to contain what was underneath it, I knew from the moment you handed that boy his wolf. She left before Stefania could ask what, exactly, she had known. The study was quiet. Baylor appeared briefly in the doorway, gave the nod, the same one from 5 years of corridor crossings, carrying the same weight it had always carried, plus everything the last 3 weeks had added to it, and disappeared. Outside, the winter light was moving toward afternoon, pressing long and gold through the study window. Lutano was at the window with his back to her, looking at the pack grounds below. She watched him for a moment, the set of his shoulders, the particular quality of a man who was preparing to set something down that he had been carrying a long way. "I need to tell you something," he said. She waited. "I have been trying to find the right way to say it for 2 weeks. I have decided the right way does not exist, so I will say it plainly." He turned. His face was completely open. No management, no the Alpha King layer, no protective distance. Just the man underneath all of it, who had been there all along, visible to her in pieces since the night on the great hall's stone floor. "The mate bond arrived the night you opened your eyes in my chambers and asked about my children before you asked about yourself." The room was very still. "I know you did not ask for it." His voice was steady, but not easy. "I know what this pack has cost you, and I know that I am connected to what was done to your father, because it happened in my house, under my authority, with my council's name on it. I know that no acknowledgement undoes that." A pause. "I am not asking you for anything. I am telling you because you deserved to know. And I was a coward for not saying it sooner." The fire made its small domestic sound. Outside, the wind had dropped to nothing. Stefania looked at him. She looked at the man who had ruled for 11 years alone, who had raised twin pups through a grief he had never let the pack witness, who had sat in a chair by her door for 3 days without sleeping because he could not make himself leave, who had interrogated her and believed her, and looked at her with the particular expression of someone encountering something that rearranged their understanding of what was possible, who had walked down a staircase in a room full of witnesses with his eyes on her face. She thought about 5 years of being invisible. She thought about the careful, practiced habit of not looking directly at him, the way you did not look directly at a fire. She thought about the moment in his chambers when she had reached for the cup of water and their fingers had overlapped on the handle, and she had felt warm, unmistakable, ancient, something she had immediately filed in the place she was not going to examine. She had felt it before he did. She was almost certain of that now. She had simply decided that the Alpha King would not feel it toward a packless healer's assistant from the lower residential wing, and she had put it away, and she had been wrong. She stood up. "I felt it too," she said, "in the chambers, when you handed me the water." Something moved through his face, relief, arriving and gathering into something warmer, something that was not controlled and was not trying to be. "You felt it," he said. "That you were interrogating me for being a spy," she said. It seemed like poor timing to mention it. The breath he released was the specific breath of someone setting down a weight they had been carrying without realizing the full measure of it. Something eased in him, the tight, careful containment of weeks unwinding all at once, visible in his posture, in his face, in the particular quality of his attention as he crossed the room. He stopped in front of her. He looked at her the way he had been looking at her since the night in the great hall, completely, without the management layer, with the expression of someone for whom looking had become the whole activity. Then he reached for her hand. Not a claim. Not the Alpha King taking something. A man reaching. She looked at his hand. She looked at his face. She thought about her father, who had told her that the truth, said plainly, was almost always more powerful than anything dressed up. She thought about 5 years of surviving a place, and the difference between surviving a place and belonging to one. She put her hand in his. His fingers closed, careful, certain, the way she imagined every piece of work he had ever done was done. Like someone who understood that things built to hold required attention to the details. The days that followed were not without difficulty. A pack council to rebuild, allied pack relationships to repair. The slow, specific work of cleaning out 6 years of Armani Richmond's careful corruption from every account it had touched. Testimony, records, the painstaking process of distinguishing between wolves who had served under a compromised council in good faith and wolves who had known and chosen to look away. Hard work, necessary work, the kind of work that built the thing it was supposed to build if you did it honestly and kept showing up. Stefania and Lutano did it side by side, or she moved through Iron Vale differently now, not because her position had changed, though it had, formally, in ways that the pack would take time to fully absorb, but because she had stopped practicing invisibility. She had stopped managing how much of herself was present in any given room, stopped calibrating herself to fit the shape the pack had decided she occupied. She occupied a different shape now. She was still learning the edges of it. Pearl cried at the mate bond announcement and tried to turn away before anyone saw, which fooled no one. She recovered quickly and spent the next hour talking to everyone in the household about it in detail. Baylor produced a formal bow, the real kind, the deep kind, the one reserved for events of genuine significance, and held it long enough that Stefania felt, for a moment, the full weight of what it communicated. Harris Doolin gave her the look, then gave her a nod that, from Harris, that was the most genuine thing she had received from him in 5 years. Wren decided that the carved wooden wolf's name was Turbo, and the Turbo was now Stefania's officially, because Turbo had decided so. And that was that. Isla drew a new picture. Stefania and Lutano and the twins in the great hall, all 4 of them, with the Iron Vale banners overhead. She had drawn the claw pendants on both of them. Stefania put the drawing on the shelf in her new room. Beside it, the dried herb bundle from Pearl, the smooth riverstone from her father, the copy of the craftsman, records with his name in honest ink, and Turbo the wooden wolf, right side up, exactly as promised. The morning they stood in the great hall, Lutano, Stefania, the assembled council, the pack witnesses, and Elder Gregory Hobbs read Doolin Finch's name correctly into the official record. The way it should have been said 5 years ago, the room was very quiet. Stefania stood straight and let herself feel it. Not the grief, not the anger, which had been clean and useful and had done its work. She let herself feel the particular warmth of something set right, the satisfaction of truth arriving where it belonged, late but whole, in the place it had been taken from. She did not cry until she was outside. She cried the way she had learned to cry from her father, quietly, completely, without trying to make it something other than what it was, or the cold morning air, the frost on the lower courtyard stones, the particular sound of Iron Vale in early winter, the mountains and the wind and the old stone. She had stood in this courtyard 5 years ago, in the grey dawn, watching the forest take her father, and she had not known then that she was staying not from stubbornness alone, but because the moon goddess had something specific in mind and had needed her to remain. She knew now, or she pressed her hand flat against the stone wall of the great hall, the same stone she had crossed 100 times with her healer's satchel, invisible, present, practicing the art of being somewhere without being seen, and she felt the warmth of it, retained from the morning light. Old stone, cold in its edges and warm at its heart. She heard his footsteps behind her. She did not turn. He came to stand beside her. He did not say anything. He did not need to. He was very good, she had learned. The particular skill of being present without filling the silence with something unnecessary. They stood together in the winter morning, looking at the pack grounds. After a while, she said, "He would have liked you." "Tell me about him," Lutano said. So she did. Standing in the lower courtyard with the frost on the stones and the mountain cold settling into old walls, she told him about a craftsman who built things to hold and took quiet, honest pride in the evenness of his joints. She told him about the kitchen table he had made himself and the sawdust in the creases of his palms. She told him about a man who believed that the truth, said plainly, was almost always easier than the version you dressed up. Lutano listened the way he listened to everything, completely, without the impatience of someone waiting for the part that required a response. The wind came off the mountains in its particular autumn way, not sharp, but deep and settled, carrying the smell of pine bark and frost, and the cold that moved into old stone and stayed. The same wind she had walked through 100 Tuesday evenings with her healer's satchel and her worn grey cloak, invisible, present, practicing. She had spent 5 years being invisible inside a pack that took her father and called her unclaimed, or the moon goddess had simply been waiting, with the patience of someone who knew exactly how the story was supposed to end, for the one night that would make staying worth every year of it. She reached for Lutano's hand. He took it. The mate bond moved between them, warm and settled and fully present, the way a fire was warm when it had been burning long enough to have nothing left to prove.